Hello, everyone. Most welcome to Heidegger 1732b. We will continue yesterday's 1732a, and we are at the article Wittgenstein and Psychology by Daniel T. Hutto. We talked last time about how our want for misusing or overusing words like explanation, something I usually refer to as technological thinking, has led to blocking out understanding. And knowing, that's a good one there. If you just go up to nice, no, that stuff. Knowing how we go wrong in seeking general explanations of psychological phenomena. He warns us against a main cause of philosophical disease, a one-sided diet. One nourishes one's thinking with only one kind of example. So he's not against explanation, but it's too one-sided. It's the amount. And I would say that he's very close to Derrida. A lot of comparison has been made between Wittgenstein and Derrida. It's the overuse of oppositions that Derrida, so to speak, is looking at, or he is uncovering it, if you like. And it's in the texts of Monod that is very clear. François Jacob, Bernard Kangelhem, when we looked into life, death, they overuse at a certain instant in the argument essence, teleology, meaning, I would say, too, sort of luring the reader into this picture-driven understanding. So Derrida is using deconstruction to reveal that there is a picture very clearly, especially in Kangelhem and Bernard. Jacob, I would see it absolutely in Jacob. The overuse of metaphysical concepts to defend what Hutto is calling scientism. Let's get into scientism at page 10. We cannot have it bigger now. That's max. Won't work, will it? Scientism is the wish to use technological explanations everywhere, and thereby destroying the effect of explanation. He also at one instance called it forget the why question. Well, that can be translated in use the why question when it's suitable. Overuse will destroy the why question. Which we need. Page 10, third paragraph. Scientism and the dangers of philosophical theorizing. The approach Wittgenstein recommends for thinking about the psychological not only stands apart from the mainstream view of today's analytic philosophy of mind and the sciences of mind. It stands wholly against it. This is because the mainstream view everywhere eschews description in favor of explanation. It assumes that there is some objective, real, substantive essence to mental phenomenon that can be discovered either through a priori or a posteriori investigation. Consider that Papineau, 2014, tries to persuade us that philosophy is like science in that it is primarily aimed at understanding the actual world studied by science. Not some further realm of metaphysical modality. In making this case, he promotes the idea that philosophy is concerned with the a posteriori, the synthetic and the actual. Likewise, Williamson maintains that philosophy's interest is discovering new facts about various phenomena, and as such, philosophical truths are not generally truths about words or concepts. And while he agrees that at least some branches of philosophy are scientific, he allows the philosophical investigations can perfectly well concern the a priori, the analytic, and the possible. This is because although he sees philosophy and science as aligned, he refuses to endorse the Philistine emphasis on a few natural sciences. In essence, the mainstream actively embraces a particular self-conception of its central business, that of advancing theoretical explanations in ways that help to promote exactly the sort of deeply ingrained and hard to escape trends of thought about so-called mental phenomena that Wittgenstein warns against. Given the diametrically opposed starting points, it is hardly surprising that contemporary analytic philosophers, let alone empirically minded psychologists, are dismissive of Wittgenstein's proposed focus and methodology. Today, as Horwich observes, the name Wittgenstein is uttered with a curl of the lip in many philosophical circles. Given the scientific turn in philosophy, which regards philosophy to be continuous with science, it is easy to why this might be so. reflecting on the state of Oxford philosophy in a recent interview. David Chalmers describes his desire to move away from the a priori approach it embraced in his aspirations to make connections with science. In announcing his interest in understanding consciousness in this mood to his fellow graduate students, most of which were Wittgensteinians. He reports that one of them said I should study how the word conscious is used in our language games. That set the tone for the place for me, perhaps wrongly. Exhibiting the same attitude in referring to Wittgenstein's idea of form of life. Fodor and Lepore simply note, we do not know what to make of this. Anyhow, we're pretty sure it's not the way we wish to do philosophy. The fundamental disagreement about the target and nature of the philosophical enterprise explains why, despite the fact that Wittgenstein unquestionably occupies an extremely prominent place in the canon of Western philosophy, his approach is generally reviled, and his insights on method and their implications for the possibilities of philosophy are typically misrepresented, downplayed, or ignored in the contemporary analytic scene. Indeed, the prevailing view amongst those who dismiss Wittgenstein today is that the main of them of the many things that went wrong with the philosophy of mind in the Wittgenstein Ryle tradition was its inability even to make sense of such notions as that of a mental process. The constituents of mental processes are causal interactions among the very sorts of things whose existence Wittgenstein, Ryle, their followers are committed to denying. The dominant trend in analytic philosophy is to suppose that all good philosophizing must take the form of theorizing that aims to discover something new about the phenomenon under investigation. In this respect, theoretical philosophy must self-consciously and directly oppose the approach recommended by Wittgenstein. Speaking for the mainstream, Fodor supplies the following remark in which he disparages Wittgenstein's reasons for rejecting philosophical theorizing in the domain of psychology. It epitomizes the deep disagreement over philosophical target and method between those who follow Wittgenstein and their detractors. I would have thought that explaining the empirical data by postulating processes whose nature is left for later investigation is a characteristic of rational theory construction. Isn't that exactly what Newton did about gravity? Is it psychology that Wittgenstein doesn't like, or is it science as such? This way of putting things can make it clear that Wittgenstein's approach is at bottom anti-scientific. Yet notably, when Wittgenstein assesses the state of psychology and calls it barren, he worries that it embeds a mix of experimental methods and conceptual confusion. The existence of the experimental method makes us think we have a means of solving the problems which troubles us. Though the problems and the method pass each other by. Importantly, it is not experimental methods with which he finds fault. Rather, Wittgenstein's interest is in how psychologists characterize and understand their data, not how they come by it per se. Wittgenstein's interest in and concerns about psychology arise precisely because far from achieving the status of a purely empirical science, by his lights, psychology is riddled with conceptual confusions of a philosophical nature. Consider that science is full of so-called expanded meanings, instances in which a familiar word, such as charm or spin, is used with an entirely new sense in a scientific theory. And thereby given special technological meanings. In such cases, as Horwich emphasizes, we must be aware that the meaning of a word is something we bestow, not usually explicitly, by means of deliberate stipulation, but often implicitly, merely by using the word in certain ways so that the change in its meaning does not require an overt definition, but may come about through a shift in its fundamental pattern of deployment. So barring confusions over the labels, we shouldn't, for example, come to be mystified about the metaphysical status of so-called imaginary points in mathematics once we know how such terms are used. This works fine for pure cases in which new terms are introduced into science. I put a parenthesis here, we've been talking about spin, collapse of the probability wave or the superposition, distance, time, and so on, end of parenthesis. But the trouble is that in psychology, there is often no such clean break between ordinary and scientific usages. A prime example of an impure case can be found in what Wittgenstein calls Freud's abominable mess. Wittgenstein famously takes issue with psychoanalysis and the sort of mythologies of the mind it promotes. The root problem is that it confuses reasons. For example, a patient's expressed narrative about their dreams with empirically discovered causes. This led its practitioners to lay claim to have explained things in psychodynamic terms when they had only, in fact, elected certain descriptions from their patients Hence, Wittgenstein accused Freud of everywhere confounding hypothesis with further descriptions, treating his findings as if they were a matter of scientific discovery. Freud advances explanations when the matters he deals with demand clarification. That is, they call for elucidation of the relation in which we stand to the phenomena rather than an explanation of them. Indeed, the situation is made worse by the fact that on Wittgenstein's analysis, the phenomena dealt with are beyond empirical explanation, and that understanding them does not require it. Freud theorizing provides a pretty clear and compelling case in which the explanations on offer are not scientific, they are scientistic. To the extent that today's sciences of the mind also embed impure picture-sponsored scientific thinking, there remains an urgent and inescapable need for conceptual clarification with respect to how they conceive of its subject matter. Seen in this context, further, it should be clear that Wittgenstein's recommended approach to psychology is neither motivated by a particular dislike nor a general dislike of science. Rather, Wittgenstein recommended his approach because, by his lights, such an approach is needed for philosophical reasons. It is need to deal with the conceptual confusions that are, if he is right, as rife in what bills itself as scientific psychology as they are in professional philosophy. To put the record straight, it was never unpolluted psychological theorizing per se, such as the scientific contributions of Newton that concern Wittgenstein. So while Wittgenstein is not opposed to science, he is opposed to the idea that philosophy could be prosecuted in a scientific manner. Namely, that philosophical problems can be resolved by making new scientific discoveries about the operation of the mind. Thus, in speaking of psychology's conceptual confusions, Wittgenstein is taking those to be of a distinctively philosophical kind. Namely, as having a source and character that makes it impossible to overcome them by the provision of better and more refined theories, explanations, or empirical studies. Apparently, as Freud's case exemplifies, scientists have no natural immunity to picture-driven intellectual diseases. And to the extent that they do suffer from such diseases, the only possible treatment for the condition is philosophical treatment. Aren't the contemporary sciences of the mind in better shape today? There is reason to think not. Consider a shining example that is brought to light by Fodor's claim that Hume is the true grandfather of cognitive science, and moreover, barring some inessential differences, that his theory of ideas is really a form of Cartesian theory of mind. Viewed from a sufficiently general vantage point, Fyodor identifies the main commitments of Hume's theory of ideas as being essentially Cartesian in both regard concepts to be a species of mental representations and are distinguished by what they mentally represent. The concept C is simply whatever it is with which the mind represents in thought the property of being C, or better, since conceptual representations are intentional, it is whatever it is with which the mind represents in thought the property of being C as such. Over time, the central branches of cognitive science have moved away from thinking of mental processes in Humean associationist terms in favor of understanding them computationally. Moreover, the empiricists' notions of that ideas resemble what they stand for has been mostly replaced as well. Even so, Fyodor is right to that the general idea that mental processes are defined as operations over inner mental objects of sort is still very much alive and well at the foundations of today's sciences of the mind. To the extent that this is so, contemporary scientific psychology inherits a cornerstone assumption from Hume's theory of ideas and long tradition in philosophy that is committed to a picture according to which concepts are literally mental objects. What is the source of this assumption? Fisher argues that the concept of mind and idea first made debut in the West, along with the rise of British empiricism during the early modern period, from the mid-17th century to the mid-18th century. In tune with Fyodor's assessment of the situation, it is at this point that a new concept of mind as a kind of container of mental happenings was first forged. Displacing the previously dominant Aristotelian conception of mind. On Fisher's analysis, the new notion of mind, which was built on an analogy between perceiving and thinking, had two aspects. It implied a perceptual space in which objects of perception are located and a perceptual organ with which they are viewed. Accordingly, on this new way of thinking about minds, perception only occurs when some sort of idea is in the mind. Once the perceiving thinking analogy was firmly in place, these characteristic framework ideas came to be treated as obviously true by philosophers at the time. And yet, as Fisher emphasizes, they are clearly not part of common sense. Instead, they are distinctively philosophical and at the time fresh intuitions shared with explicit argument by many early modern thinkers. What might explain this? Ironically, Fisher calls on psychology to do interesting works for philosophy at this juncture. In this respect, Fisher goes beyond Wittgenstein to try to give a deeper account of why we are prone to certain philosophical picture if he systematically makes non-intentional analogical inferences which assimilate targets to models of a conceptual metaphor in ways the thinker knows them to be different. And we put a stop there. I continue because we lost Kalle for a second here. And we put a point here. Fisher 2011, page 32. And we have some interesting gems here to put to the forward. On page 11, we find I think it's like the 9th line. It's a reply from Chalmers. Yes, he reports that, and I go directly into the senses. One of his students, graduate students, had replied to them about understanding consciousness. And one of them said, I should study how the word conscious is used in our language games. And Chalmers think to himself, that set the tone for the place for me, perhaps wrongly. So the answer he got made him go into the scientific way of thinking. And I think it's important to understand here why Chalmers took the route. I think I would have done the same thing, and I think the absolute majority would do that. One does it with a sense of it would be giving up and to only look at how the word conscious is used in the language game. It's like giving up. And then you go to the scientific way. The picture is behind, and we choose a route accordingly. Go to the very bottom, there is a quote from Fyodor. I would have thought that explaining the empirical data by postulating processes whose nature is left for later investigation is a characteristic of rational theory of construction. Isn't that exactly what Newton did about gravity? Is it psychology that Wittgenstein doesn't like? Or is it science as such? But this is so grand. It should be put on the wall. I perfectly understand the reasoning behind and why Fyodor goes the way he does. There's no doubt here. Let's examine psychology as Newton did about gravity, or friction, or force, or momentum. And we can go to page 13. It's a clarification here. It's the third paragraph. Beginning with, to put the record straight, it was never unpolluted psychological theorizing per se, such as the scientific contributions of Newton that concern Wittgenstein. And this is pressing the point, he's not against science or Newton, but philosophy or psychology should not be prosecuted in a scientific manner. Because the categories and terms in psychology and philosophy are already put in place since millennia, millions of years, I would say. Whereas in Newton, they are new. And they have their specific purpose only in the Newtonian language game, not outside. I think I'm going to make a summary more extensive next time. We've been running out of time here. Kalle, maybe something here, and I fill out.
Text was complicated. Let me see if I understood correctly. You commented on page 11.
Ursäkta mig, Kalle. Du hörs väldigt dåligt nu. Jag tror att det är lite dålig mottagning. Ja.
Let me see. Where did you quote? You had this, and let me see. What is the part that you quoted? 11. Let me see. No, I don't find it. So in this quotation by Fodor, so what is the problem that Newton, Wittgenstein has about psychology is that the keyword is later. Am I right, Hans?
Yes, yes, you're on the right track there.
Because it's about a posteriori.
Yes, it's has also to do with applying terms as we've gone through this series. We see how Newton establishes a new language game, which is called classical physics. And it's nothing wrong with that at all. And I think we claimed that earlier. No scientist would say that. But the problem is when we take that language game out of its proper use within physics and put it in psychology, then the problems erupt, because in psychology we have expressions in psychology since millennia or 10,000s of years. So yes, you'd be right.
Let me see this on page 12. This example, yes, let me see about next.
Oh yeah.
This example.
They are ineradicably messy. Very good.
Mm. So Wittgenstein accuses Freud that Freud confuses hypotheses with descriptions.
Oh yeah, yes.
So what is meant here?
In psychology, as been the case for hundreds and thousands of years, the expressions are not constructed as explanations of something, as they are in technology, the classical physics. So if you have the expression time in Newton, it has an explanation. Time is an explanation of something. It's an hypothesis. But because we already have all the expressions in psychology, we have soul, we have intention, we have anger, happiness, since a very, very long time, you cannot use hypothesis on these terms to say, let me give a correct example, a hypothesis of sexuality as Freud proposed himself. And that causes this mess. I think confusion is a better word.
So hypothesis in science, how is it used?
You were breaking up there, Caleb. Please
So
repeat.
The word hypothesis, how do you use it in science?
How do you explain phenomena A? So you have a phenomenon and in technological terms constructed since 1689, for instance, we have to use those terms in that particular sort of cut off, not connected to ordinary language game, to explain something. I think exactly the same is done not only in psychology, but also in anthropology, theology, your own subject. Language, very good example.
So these patients that come to Freud, they have descriptions of the problems, and then Freud, he makes a hypothesis of the cause.
Yes,
He
exactly.
makes a hypothesis of the origin of the problems.
Very well, fantastic, exactly, yeah.
So Freud is interested in the origin, like many others.
Yes.
But Wittgenstein is not interested in the origin because he cannot know the origin.
I think, yes, you cannot know it because the question is wrongly posed. Whereas in classical physics, it's not, because that language game is different. I think we better end there because, as you noted, you have to go away, and we've been going over time. What I will do is next time we go into this, I will go to make a longer summary, going back to quotes I made from the previous reading here in 1732.
I hope let's end there.
I will stop the recording, say thank you very much for participating, and have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much, and bye-bye. And thank you, Kalle Lundahl, also.
Thank you.